As we are in business, we must also be finding ways to activate and finding the courage to do the things we know that are needed rather than being limited by what feels possible, because actually we know what's needed. The science is telling us what we need to do.
So to me, to make it more concrete, is recognize, see the emergence patterns that are all across the economy, all over the world, and have been basically growing and growing for decades. Recognize them as a distinct sector of activity and intentionally create the supportive environment around them. In the same way that we grow the private sector as the top goal for economic progress and development, we measure progress as more and bigger for-profit firms. The private sector grows, everything works. Recognize there's a whole nother sector, class, movement of entrepreneurs and investors and consumers and so on. Recognize that's a whole new sector trying to be born, and do the same kind of thing you do to grow this sector for that.
Entrepreneurship and employee activism. Entrepreneurship I see as a little bit different. They're close bedfellows. So we do need to awaken, people having new products, services, whatever, business models inside business. Activism is almost a more simple and almost powerful thing that you don't have to have everyone on board. You can see what 100 people signing a letter in Microsoft can do to change policy around stuff. You can see what Google strikes do. Business is so directed by the handful of usually white men at the top, dancing to the tune of that Wall Street that we talked about before. Whereas almost we're seeing a democratization, I think, going to start taking place across companies where power is shifting downwards and outwards. And we're starting to see that individuals find that they have a voice, maybe not individually, but collectively they do have. And if these companies know that the human capital they need to deliver on their services is willing to walk out the door or willing to act in unison with one another.
I think there is something here about where and how businesses support their employees to engage outside of the business in social movements and protests. There's also companies like Patagonia that are taking a stand on issues they really care about. So Patagonia recently pulled its products from a high-end Jackson Hole resort when they caught wind that resort had hosted a right-wing conference. So that's a form of taking a stand in a really important way. Patagonia also funds and supports bold, direct action organizations that are focused on the root cause of the environmental crisis. So that's another way in which we're seeing businesses and people in businesses activate. And then the other one that we've already spoken about it already, but I will bring it up again, is engaging in collaborations with others in your industry that are, industry associations looking at really ambitious levels of change, again, being guided by what is needed rather than what feels possible, and changing the rules of the game. Where and how do we need to fundamentally see different policies in place so our systems and markets work differently. The one thread that seems to be tying all these different forms of stories of business activism is that what's critical is that the business is a tool for the activism rather than the activism being as a tool for the business.
Do I want somebody in new product development or a brand manager or something to be going out on the streets, or coming up with, a lower plastic or biodegradable or more nutritious or whatever issue you want to have? I mean, you might say the answer is and both. I've nothing wrong with people going out in the streets, right? But I can go out, you can go out, the person next door can go out on the streets. But there's something about somebody in a Google or a Nestle or an Accenture doing something on the inside that for me is really powerful, and we need to be cognizant of that.
It feels like what we're saying is the movement of movements towards what? What are we moving towards? And then we talk about activism. Activism towards what? Now we're talking about social intrapreneurs as well as entrepreneurs to push the organization towards what, right? It is no longer sufficient to only develop the profit maximizing, financially centric mode of economic activity. Also grow the benefit optimizing mode of activity, right?
I think there's some switch that needs to go on in the minds of certainly today's leaders. Longer term, I'm sure there's going to be fourth sector, whatever. But if we, the what, And in service of what? The SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, net zero. We've got a reasonable barometer of where we need to go to. The problem is, at the moment, we have this vicious circle of people, trying to maximize short-term profit, trying to do a bit of CSR on the side or sustainability to give them the license to operate, burning out people making more and more money, working harder and harder, more and more unhappy. Something has to switch there where it's going to come from that body intelligence and heart intelligence of the people working in these institutions. And if we flip that and have people working in organizations whose North Star is purpose and who are going out there and doing some of this good in the world, I know this might sound slightly nirvana and simplistic, but I do think there is something around the fact that we will have more engaged, more inspired, less burnt out people working for organizations who truly embrace and embed purpose rather than having it as a marketing derived